Hola, molt bon dia. Em dic Jordi Sicres i tinc el plaer avui de presentar-vos aquesta conversa oberta amb l'Anthony Soares, que és el director del Centre d'Estudis Transfronterers, que és una institució, ell ens la comentarà bé, ens l'explicarà bé exactament què és el que fan, però és una institució independent que es troba a la frontera entre Irlanda i Irlanda del Nord, que com sabeu Irlanda és un país dividit en dos estats diferents i en aquesta frontera hi ha aquest centre que funciona des del 1999 que dirigeix el col·lega Anthony Soares i que treballa sobretot per fomentar la cooperació transfronterera entre aquests dos territoris. Llavors, aquí teniu la pàgina web per si voleu més informació sobre el centre. I aquí, no sé si es veu gaire bé, però aquí teniu el mapa perquè us situeu. Està a la ciutat d'Armagh, que està molt, molt, molt propera a la frontera. No sé si podeu veure bé la línia fronterera des d'aquí. Llavors, aquest centre el coneixem des de la universitat, el coneixem perquè tant el Centre d'Estudis Transfronterers com la Universitat de Girona formen part d'una xarxa europea d'euroinstituts, que són institucions de diversos tipus que treballem o que entre les nostres funcions hi ha els estudis i el foment de la cooperació transfronterera. Nosaltres com a universitat som diverses les persones, la Mònica n'és un clar exemple, que la tenim aquí, que treballem per fer aquesta, per en certa manera esborrar aquestes fronteres i poder treballar conjuntament amb la gent de l'altre costat, d'aquesta línia imaginària, aquesta línia mental que tenim molt integrada en el nostre imaginari, però que a la pràctica no deixa de ser una línia dibuixada en un mapa. Amb la Unió Europea, afortunadament, aquestes fronteres s'intenten desdibuixar, s'intenten esborrar, fins i tot en la representació física. Ara podem creuar la frontera per l'autopista i gairebé ja no veiem, ja no ens n'adonem que hem creuat una frontera. Només canvien els senyals i encara en diversos llocs aquí encara tenim espais de control transfronterer on ens poden demanar el passaport, però la línia, la barrera física que hi acostumava a haver abans, ja està esborrada i ha de ser així. Llavors, la xarxa aquesta TEIN representa diferents institucions que es troben en diferents fronteres europees. Ja tenim un parell d'universitats a la frontera austríaca, eslovena i italiana. Tenim també associacions com la OLSA o l'Institut Euroescola i la Universitat WSB a la frontera txeca, polonesa, eslovaca. La frontera entre Irlanda i Irlanda del Nord, que està representada en aquest cas pel Centre for Cross-Border Studies i el seu director que avui ens farà aquesta presentació. La frontera catalana també, entre la Universitat de Perpinyà, la Universitat de Girona i l'Institut d'Estudis Catalans, la frontera franco-belga, la frontera entre França, Suïssa, Itàlia, França, Alemanya i Suïssa, la frontera alemanya-polonesa i dels Països Baixos, Alemanya i Bèlgica. Per tant, som una xarxa de gent en països diversos, amb institucions també diferents. Les universitats ens dediquem a la docència, ens dediquem a la recerca, també fem formació per a la cooperació transfronterera, fem projectes pròpiament de cooperació transfronterera. Hi ha institucions com l'Euroinstitut a la frontera franco-alemanya que es dediquen exclusivament a fer projectes i a formar la gent, capacitar la gent perquè faci cooperació transfronterera. I aquest és el cas de l'Institut del Centre for Cross-Border Studies. Com sabeu, l'Anthony ens en parlarà en més detall, però com sabeu, la història d'Irlanda, precisament la història recent i no tan recent d'Irlanda, no és especialment plàcida. Ha estat una història molt violenta, una història molt problemàtica, i el procés de pau dels acords del Divendres Sant, de fet, encara s'estan implementant. I una de les funcions principals d'aquest centre que dirigeix l'Anthony és precisament fomentar aquesta cooperació transfronterera, apoderar la gent, els ciutadans, les institucions locals, les agrupacions, les empreses, els governs locals, perquè puguin treballar conjuntament i al final visquin millor. Al final l'objectiu de les universitats, dels centres, dels governs hauria de ser, i en el seu cas ben segur que ho és, ajudar que la gent visqui millor. Per tant, el fet de poder viure en un lloc i anar a treballar a l'altre, o de viure en una banda de la frontera i anar a estudiar a la universitat a l'altra banda de la frontera, doncs això hauria de ser normal. No ens passa gaire encara. Hi ha fronteres en què aquest procés està molt més avançat, d'altres, com la nostra, per exemple, que estem més endarrerits en aquest sentit. Bé, dono la paraula ja a l'Anthony. Jo crec que ens ha entès prou bé, perquè ell és portuguès i, per tant, el català més o menys l'entén. Thank you, Anthony, for being here, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Jordi. I'm going to hopefully be able to share my screen with you in a second, but before I do that, just to apologize, I am speaking to you in English. I wish I could speak Catalan. I could speak Portuguese to you, and maybe we could understand each other, but I'm going to opt for English for the moment. I'm just waiting to be able to share my screen with you any second now, hopefully. Yes. Hopefully you'll be able to see that now. And I'd just like to thank the university and Jordi for asking me to speak to you today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and it's great to see you all there and to speak to people who are joining us online. And perhaps just to let you know that I'm hoping to kind of focus in on three main issues, is to give you an idea about the work of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, of which, as Jordi said, I am the director. Maybe highlight how the work of the centre connects to the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement, the peace agreement of 1998 that brought to an end the violence, the conflict in Northern Ireland, and also to touch on how that and our work relates to cross-border cooperation, and to give you an idea about what our border is like in terms of mobility, and then to talk a bit about Brexit, the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland that formed part of the withdrawal agreement between the UK and the European Union in terms of the UK's departure, and what that means for cross-border cooperation and mobility. And then lastly, just perhaps to highlight a few issues or lessons that we might be able to take away from the situation here in terms of cross-border cooperation and the negotiations between the UK and the EU, what lessons can be learned. But just before I go on, I just like to really stress that although it might seem like a lot to you as we go through this presentation, I promise you, I am only really touching the surface of many of these issues. It's absolutely impossible to give you a really accurate picture of what the cross-border situation is here on the island of Ireland, or to give you really a detailed idea of what Brexit means and what is going on in terms of Brexit. but perhaps maybe in the discussion afterwards, we can maybe focus in on a few of the details that I'll, in terms of the issues that I'm only touching upon. So first of all, just to, as you already outlined it perfectly in terms of the centre, which I am the director of, it was formed in September 1999. It is independent. And I really want to stress that it's an independent organization. It has charitable status, therefore it's a not-for-profit organization. But I repeat, the independence of the organization is absolutely vital to us. It's something that we value and that we want to maintain and protect. And in terms of the work that we do, it was really based around what we would see as two core policy pillars, things that inform how we operate, what we do, what our mission is. One of those core policy pillars is the Good Friday Agreement and what it contains. And we'll come back to that later on. The other one was EU cohesion policy. Especially in terms of what cohesion policy means for territorial integration and for cross-border cooperation. The cohesion policy is an important policy in terms of the work that we do. Obviously, because of Brexit, that pillar is, let's say, slightly problematic now for an organization that is actually based in Northern Ireland, but cooperates really with the Republic of Ireland. So one part of the island is no longer linked to cohesion policy directly. So that I just want to highlight that, but it's still an important pillar for us in terms of the work that we do. What is the centre's mission? It really was created in order to empower citizens to build capacity for cross-border mobility and cooperation across sectors, across jurisdictional boundaries on the island of Ireland, but also further afield. And Georgie referred to TAIN, the Transfrontier Era Institute Network, which we are members of, along with the University of Girona. So we work with colleagues throughout the European Union who work on cross-border cooperation issues. So it's important to stress that as well. Although our focus is obviously on the island of Ireland, we collaborate, we share, we learn from other partners throughout the European Union. And also just to mention that our focus is on cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but we also work on cooperation between the island of Ireland and Great Britain, Scotland, England, and Wales. So it's what we call North-South cooperation, so between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but also East-West cooperation between the island of Ireland and Great Britain, Scotland, England, and Wales. In terms of to give you, and this really is just a superficial idea of what that work involves in terms of supporting cross-border cooperation, capacity for cross-border cooperation. It really is about making connections. That is absolutely essential to cross-border cooperation anywhere. So we're no different to anyone else who works in cross-border cooperation. But just to give you an idea in terms of what we mean by making connections, we're involved in trying to make connections between government departments. So government departments in Northern Ireland and government departments in the Republic of Ireland. But we're also involved in making connections between different sectors. So people working in health, people working in education, environment. So it's making those connections between sectors and making those connections between sections within each jurisdiction. So, for example, making connections between health and environment in Northern Ireland, but doing the same in the Republic of Ireland, and then linking these things up between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But also really importantly to us, really important, especially for an organization like ourselves, which is an NGO, an independent organization, it's making the vital connections between community organizations and the people who are responsible for developing policies or responsible for making decisions within each jurisdiction. So government officials, ministers in the two jurisdictions, and then making those connections between the two jurisdictions as well. So it's all about connections at all sorts of levels between the two jurisdictions and within each of the two jurisdictions. So making those connections is really important to us, and it's something that keeps us extremely busy in terms of ensuring that dialogue is happening within and across the two jurisdictions at all levels. A lot of our work then is making the case for cross-border cooperation. It's ensuring that our decision makers, our policy makers recognize the value of cross-border cooperation, that are aware of issues related to cross-border cooperation, where cross-border cooperation can actually bring benefit to resolving certain problems that may be facing people in the two jurisdictions. So in terms of that, in terms of making the case for cross-border cooperation, that means that some of the work that we do is organizing policy seminars on issues related to cross-border cooperation. So it can be across a whole range of aspects that relate to cross-border cooperation. And we organize those policy seminars within the Irish Parliament, in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and in Brussels as well. Obviously, COVID meant that over the last couple of years meant that these policy seminars have to be virtual, but we are now returning to in-person policy seminars. So we will again this year be organizing that type of event in those places, in those parliaments and assemblies, and in Brussels. We also, a lot of our work involves providing written and oral evidence to parliamentary committees on issues related to cross-border cooperation. So that means responding to consultations, to calls for evidence in terms of various parliamentary committees, responding to them in written form, but also appearing before parliamentary committees to speak on issues related to cross-border cooperation. And when I mean parliamentary committees, because it's cross-border cooperation, that means parliamentary committees in the Northern Ireland Assembly, parliamentary committees in the Irish Parliament, the Oireachtas in Dublin. It can also, and over the last few years because of Brexit, it also means appearing before parliamentary committees in London, in the Houses of Parliament. So, and in the two parts of of Parliament, which is the House of Commons and the House of Lords, so appearing before parliamentary committees there as well. And all the time, in order to ensure that cross-border cooperation issues that people pay attention to them, that they are aware of them, it means us continually engaging directly with political representatives and government officials. We are constantly doing that. And that means, again, in Dublin, in Belfast, in London, in Brussels, but elsewhere. And again, because of Brexit, when I say elsewhere, it means, for example, engaging with political representatives from various European Union member states, or with embassies representing various EU member states, embassies in London and embassies in Dublin as well. So it's this continual engagement in order to raise people's awareness of issues related to cross-border cooperation. And again, more recently, how Brexit may be impacting on our ability to engage in cross-border cooperation. So just to highlight then, in terms of what we do as an organization in relation to cross-border cooperation and how that relates to the Good Friday Agreement, the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. As I said earlier on, and Jordi mentioned it in his introduction, we were created in 1999, so very shortly after the Good Friday Agreement came about. And I've highlighted here, in fact, what you have here is all of the main sections of the Good Friday Agreement, but really our work is related to especially strand 2 and strand 3. So you see there strand 1, strand 2, and strand 3. I'll come back to 2 of those strands, but all of our work has some connection to those 3 core strands of the Good Friday Agreement. Strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement is the strand that is about cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So this is the strand really where a lot of our work focuses on, is on that particular strand of the Good Friday Agreement. So that is cooperation between the administrations in Belfast and Dublin, who, so the two governments, the Northern Ireland government and the Dublin government, under strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement. They cooperate on various matters, education, environment, trade, agriculture, all sorts of issues. And the main forum for discussion, the official forum for discussion for that cooperation, is the North-South Ministerial Council. That is the building that you have there in that image, which just so happens is in the same place or in the same city as the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. The North-South Ministerial Council is based in Armagh as well. And so the North-South Ministerial Council is where the two governments meet and where ministers of the two governments meet to talk about cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland on issues within their competence. Now, it's just important to stress here that whereas obviously the Republic of Ireland is a sovereign member state, is a sovereign state with a government, Northern Ireland is a devolved administration. So it's part of the United Kingdom. The central government is a government in London. Northern Ireland government is a devolved administration, so it doesn't have competence over all matters. It has certain matters that are the reserved power of the government in London. So just to bear that in mind. So when the two governments meet, that's the Northern Ireland government and the Dublin government meet to discuss areas of cooperation, there have to be areas of cooperation that are within the competence of the Northern Ireland government. They can't cooperate on matters that are the responsibility of the London government. But just to emphasize, this is the strand really that the main strand where our work relates to is this strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement. The other strand where some of our work relates to is strand 3. This is the strand that is about cooperation between all of the administrations on the islands. And the formal structure for that cooperation is the British-Irish Council. And that council brings together all of the governments. So that's the Irish government, the UK government, central government, but also the Scottish government, the Welsh government, as I said, the Northern Irish government, and also the governments of the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands. So it brings together all of those governments to discuss areas of cooperation and to ensure the mutually beneficial and harmonious relations between all of the peoples within those islands. So our work also relates then to strand 3. So strand 2 and strand 3 of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, I want to mention this because this is really important. There are 3 core strands to the Good Friday Agreement, but the Good Friday Agreement sets out something that is really important. All of the institutions and all of the strands of the Good Friday Agreement are interlocking, they're interdependent. It means that if one strand isn't operating, then the others cannot operate either. So strand 1 is the strand relating to the institutions within Northern Ireland. So that's the Northern Ireland government and the Northern Ireland Assembly. If that strand isn't functioning, then in particular, strand 2 cannot function, because if there is no Northern Ireland government, then there is no Northern Ireland government to cooperate with the Irish government under strand 2. Neither can it cooperate in strand 3 because there is no Northern Ireland government to be represented in strand 3. So it's really important to understand this, the interlocking nature of all 3 strands under the Good Friday Agreement. If one doesn't operate, then the others cannot operate or cannot operate effectively. And that does relate to cooperation. As I said, if the Northern Ireland government isn't operating, then it cannot cooperate with the Irish government. So strand 2 is affected, and it can affect then the operation in terms of cross-border cooperation for other organizations that are not necessarily government organizations, but it can affect our ability to cooperate on a north-south basis. Just to mention, I am actually speaking to you from my home in Belfast, which is where the government of Northern Ireland is based. It is not operating. We had elections recently here in Northern Ireland, you might be aware of that, and we're waiting for the establishment of a government. But you may also be aware that that might be problematic. There might be some difficulties in establishing a new government in Northern Ireland. So without a government in Northern Ireland, Strand 2 will not be able to operate. So just to bring that to your attention. And they're just very, I mean, as I said, I'm only touching on the surface of many of these things, but just to give you an idea of the border here, or cross-border cooperation and cross-border mobility, what is the nature of our border? So almost 20% of the population of the island, the entire island of Ireland, so that's, I'm taking into account the population of both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so the population of Northern Ireland is around 1.8 million. And the population of the Republic of Ireland is around 6 million. 20% of that total population is located in what we see as the Northern Ireland border region, which is that region sort of in between those two red lines. Almost 20% of the population lives there. Almost 20% of all registered businesses on the island of Ireland are located in the border region. The border region contains a huge proportion of our businesses. They operate within that border region. So it's a very, very lively region in terms of business, in terms of economic activity. Now, there are various estimations as to, in terms of cross-border mobility. And just to give you an idea, the Northern Ireland's Department for the Economy has estimated there are about 25,000 daily trips. So that's trips every day that cross the Northern Ireland border every day for purposes of work or study. So this is cross-border workers or people who are crossing the border to attend college, to go to school, to go to university. So 25,000 trips every day. That isn't taken into account the many, many thousands of other trips that take place across the border every day. That's lorries crossing the border to transport goods, people crossing the border for other purposes, to shop, to visit a restaurant, to go to a cinema. There are many, many thousands of trips every day across that border. I'm now just going to touch here on a really important project that the Centre for Cross-Border has been leading over many years now, which is the Border People Project. And the reason I'm highlighting this particular project is because of where it came about. It actually came about through work that was undertaken by the North-South Ministerial Council itself, which did a study on obstacles to mobility, to cross-border mobility, looking at all the sorts of obstacles that were hindering people's ability to cross the border for various reasons, but principally to live and work. That report back in 2001 had around 50 recommendations and solutions to those cross-border obstacles that were impeding people's ability to cross the border, to live or to work or to study. That's the second recommendation in that report, was to set up what they call a one-stop cross-border mobility information website, where people could come and look for information about cross-border working, cross-border living, cross-border studying, so that people had an awareness of what it involved in terms of living or working or studying in the other jurisdiction. So if you're from the Republic of Ireland, what you have to do going to Northern Ireland and vice versa. That became the Border People Project. So the Border People Project is really an exemplary example of cross-border cooperation at its most practical and sensible. It really, it's a project that gives government departments, gives citizens and gives those people who provide advice and information to citizens the knowledge that they need in order to be able to cross the border, in order to study, to work, to live. So it deals with all sorts of issues, this Border People project. It gives information on all sorts of issues, whether it's taxation, student loans, insurance issues. It's all those practical things that people need to know, need to understand when they're undertaking some element of cross-border living. However, whereas previously when we were providing information or looking for solutions around cross-border obstacles to, let's say, cross-border working, many of the solutions were provided by EU regulations. There was always a shared, at least a shared legal basis for a lot of this cross-border mobility, which was provided by the European Union, because that was a common framework for Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, because obviously the UK and the Republic of Ireland, both as members of the European Union, had that shared legal framework for cross-border mobility, which we could always fall back on when we're looking for solutions to cross-border obstacles. But now we no longer have that shared framework. With the UK leaving the European Union, that common legal framework is no longer there. Obviously, it still pertains to the Republic of Ireland, but it no longer pertains in many, many areas to Northern Ireland and to the UK in general. So the Border People project, in its provision of information and advice around cross-border mobility, has now has to take into account what are the impacts of Brexit on that ability of people to cross the border, to work, to live, to study. And it's now, I'll just give you one example of how it's become more complicated. In the past, before Brexit, as we're providing information to EU citizens, which meant obviously any citizen of the UK, any citizen of Ireland, we always had that common framework. Now we can't do that anymore. As we're providing advice to people who are trying to cross the border to work, to live, or to study, we now have to check their nationality, ask them, what nationality are you? Because there are now different rules. If you're an Irish citizen or a British citizen or a Northern Ireland citizen, it can be pretty simple. But if you're not Irish, so if you're a Spanish citizen, a French citizen, living in the Republic of Ireland, wishing to cross the border to work, live, or study, now the rules are different. So it's added this complication to that area of our work. So perhaps now focusing a bit more then on Brexit and our involvement as an organization, an independent organization. I want to stress that again, an organization involved in supporting cross-border cooperation. And if we go back to 2016, to the referendum on UK membership of the EU, we consciously decided that what we wanted to do was to provide people with information, to give them our perspective on issues that we thought Brexit were going to impact, and issues obviously that we have an interest in. So we established a series of briefing papers in the run-up to the referendum in 2016. The first briefing paper was just an introduction that identified some of the key issues from our perspective in terms of what Brexit could mean. The second briefing paper was on how we saw Brexit affecting the constitutional makeup of the UK and Northern Ireland's relation to that constitutional makeup of the UK, and what the political impacts could be in terms of Brexit. Then also looking at regional development and cross-border cooperation, citizen mobility and economic development, how Brexit could impact in all of those. So that is one of the things that we did in the run-up to the referendum. Now, I said we value our independence. So one of the decisions that we did make in 2016 before the referendum was that we were not going to campaign in that referendum. We were not going to take part in a campaign either on those who were in favor of Brexit or to campaign with those who were in favor of remaining. We decided as an independent organization, our role was to provide as far as possible objective information on what the potential impacts of Brexit would be, rather than participate actively in any campaign one way or the other. But it wasn't just about publishing information, publishing briefing papers. It was also engagement. So in 2016, in the run-up to the referendum, we engaged with civic society and we engaged with political representatives, again, bringing to them our perspectives, our considerations, our opinions on what the potential impacts of Brexit would be. So civic society engagement, but as I said, political representatives. And again, this meant political representatives in Northern Ireland, in Ireland, in London, in Brussels, everywhere that we thought people needed to have information, have our perspective on what Brexit could actually mean. And just to give you an idea, again, I can't give you all the detail, but just what was our position, our general position in terms of Brexit. So following the referendum and the decision for the UK to the European Union, we continued our work to continue to offer our perspectives. So this is just to give you an idea. So this is back from 2018. What was our position? What was our view? And for us, the key issue was to preserve, to protect the development of the full range of socio-economic relations and North-South cooperation between the two jurisdictions on the island of Ireland, but also the preservation of relations and cooperation between the island of Ireland and Great Britain. It's that North-South and East-West element, because for us, I told you right at the beginning that one of our core policy pillars is the Good Friday Agreement and all parts of the Good Friday Agreement, not one part or the other, it's all parts. And that was our position. It continues to be our position. And back in 2018, there were debates, and they're still going on, about where would there be a border? Where would there be checks in terms of goods traveling across these islands? Our position was back then, we're trying to highlight, if you're discussing where to put border controls, where to put checks, then that means something has gone wrong. Because if you're trying to protect the Good Friday Agreement and all of the relations that encompasses, which is North-South and East-West, as well as relations within Northern Ireland itself, well, if you're thinking of where you're going to put checks, then something isn't right here, because the Good Friday Agreement, that's not what it was about. So we were trying to highlight that protection of the Good Friday Agreement. At every stage of the negotiations, and as various drafts of withdrawal agreements and protocols were published and were discussed by the UK and the European Union, we were active and putting forward our position, our perspective. And this is, again, it's just to give you an idea of where we stood. And this is back in 2018, when there was a first version of the withdrawal agreement published. It's not the withdrawal agreement that actually the two governments ended up signing up to. This is back in 2018, when the Prime Minister at that point of the UK was Theresa May. It's the first version of the withdrawal agreement. And here we're highlighting here that, and we're talking here about the protocol at that point, the version of the protocol in 2018. We were pointing out again that protocol did not protect all of the socioeconomic relations within and between these islands, but notably the East-West dimension. But if you look at the last line here, so we're saying what they had back in 2018 is not fully protecting the Good Friday Agreement. But this is important. What we also said, we also recognize the difficulty in this, given the UK's decision to leave the single market and customs union. because the UK was deciding that the way it was going to leave the European Union also meant leaving the single market and the customs union, that was going to present serious problems. How can you do that and at the same time protect all of the relations north, south, and east, west? The two things were incompatible. So I'm coming to the end. You'll be glad to know. I want to come to what we have now. So what was finally signed up to, because we are now post-Brexit. Brexit happened. So Brexit is a fact. It's happened. We have a withdrawal agreement that was signed up to by the UK government and the European Union. And within that, we have a protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. And I'm using the actual term. It's not the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. It's really important to understand that, because when people abbreviate it to the Northern Ireland Protocol, then people assume it's something just to do with Northern Ireland. It's not. It's the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. And it's stressing that element of the island of Ireland and what the protocol is doing in trying to protect those relations in terms of the island of Ireland. One of the articles that is really important to us as an institution, as an organization involved in cross-border cooperation, is Article 11, which hasn't got a very sexy title, Other Areas of North-South Cooperation. But this is the article within the protocol that talks about maintaining the necessary conditions for North-South cooperation. So the protocol, it has within it an article that says, as we implement the protocol, it must be implemented in a way that maintains the necessary conditions for North-South cooperation. That is what we focus on. And a lot of our work is monitoring whether the conditions for North-South cooperation are being maintained. What's happening? Are people still able to engage in North-South cooperation as they did pre-Brexit? So what does that involve? It involves a lot of analysis, a lot of reading of boring policy documents, but it also means active engagement. So it involves working with other organizations to ensure that we do protect North-South, but we also look at protecting East-West relations as well, because I'm going back again to the Good Friday Agreement and what that means. So it means a lot of engagement, working with other organizations. And one of the ways that we do that, back in May 2020, we established a kind of network of organizations from across the island of Ireland, called the Ad Hoc Group for North, South and East West Cooperation. It's a network which we convene, which we manage, and it's a network of organizations who are continually engaging with decision makers, policy makers, in order to ensure that Article 11 is complied with. So that means us having meetings with UK government, European Commission, Irish government and others. So this is just to give you in images a flavor of what that actually means. So this means us bringing to those people, including the now departed Lord Frost, who was the UK's lead negotiator until December of last year. The lead negotiator now is Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary of the UK government. But in that picture there, it was a meeting that we had with Lord Frost, the chief negotiator, and the other guy there on the right is the Brandon Lewis, who still is the UK government secretary for Northern Ireland. Meetings with those types of people. The picture at the top is actually a meeting with the Irish European Foreign Affairs Minister and with the Portuguese Foreign Affairs Minister. This is at a time where Portugal had the presidency of the council, so we had a meeting with them. We also have meetings with the European Commission officials who are in charge of the protocol. So that means meetings with the chairs of the specialized committee on the protocol and the chairs of another mechanism of the protocol, which is the joint consultative working group. So regular meetings with these decision makers to really bring to their attention issues around cross-border cooperation, mainly North-South cooperation, but we also do highlight issues around East-West cooperation as well. So that is what we're doing at the moment. I just want to briefly say it's not what we want to be doing. Brexit has forced this on us. What we really want to be doing is building capacity for cross-border cooperation, working with people on everyday issues of cross-border cooperation, but we've been kind of diverted. Our energy has been diverted. It has been focused on Brexit, on the protocol, and ensuring that we can continue to engage in North-South and East-West cooperation. So finally, I mean, I was really reluctant to do this, but it's kind of giving an idea of, look, of what we've been doing and what we've been seeing, and what lessons can be taken away. Jody mentioned this right at the beginning of his introduction. We had decades of a violent conflict here, and the border was central to that. We have a divided community in Northern Ireland. So one of the lessons to be taken away is the need to be sensitive to post-conflict contexts, that legal solutions. So if you're in negotiations and then you want to back up your agreement with a kind of a legal framework, the law has to be informed by cross-border and cross-community relations. It has to be sensitive to relations on a cross-border basis, but also relations to on a cross-community basis in a post-conflict context and in a divided society. So law has to be sensitive to that. The other lesson to be taken away is when you're involved in these kinds of situations, you need to engage with all levels of society. You cannot be selective in your engagement. You can't just engage with political leaders to find solutions. You have to engage with, yes, political leaders, but also with civil society, community organizations, business, and academia. Solutions can only be found to problems, especially cross-border problems, by engaging with all levels, with all sectors, because otherwise what you'll end up doing, if you just engage with one sector, let's say the business sector, to find a solution to a problem, you might think you found a solution because the business sector agrees, but then when you implement that solution, you could find that society does not accept the solution that you found just by speaking to business or just by speaking to political leaders. That's why it's really important to engage with all levels of society. And when, again, I emphasize when you're dealing with a cross-border issue, that it means all levels of society in the two jurisdictions, not just the one jurisdiction. And then finally, when you're involved in these types of situations, the provision of evidence-based information is absolutely essential. And here, academia, academics, universities are really important in providing that type of evidence-based information. But it has to be university in collaboration with civic society and business. When you're in these types of situations, it has to be a dialogue where you are gathering that evidence and you're presenting that evidence, those facts. That has been a problem. It continues to be a problem right now in terms of where we are, in terms of the discussions between the UK government and the EU, and discussions at a political level within Northern Ireland. It's the frequent reference to what are presented as facts, which aren't facts at all. They're opinions. And that's really important. So academia has a really important role to play in that. So I'm going to finish my presentation there. I said I was only touching on the surface of things. So I just hope I gave you an idea of what we're doing, where we're at. the way that we value our independence and the way that we absolutely cherish cross-border cooperation and want to support it and promote it and protect it. So I'm going to leave it at that. And hopefully if people have questions, comments, don't be afraid to offer comments as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and I'll hand over to Jordi. Thank you. Jordi, I see you can speak, but I can't hear anything that's being said there. So
Now, can you hear me now?
yes, Jordi.
Yes? Oh, great. After 2 years of doing online things, still technical problems.
Still learning.
Now, I was saying that I have several, I hope, easy to answer questions, because I'm mostly asking for specific examples. If you could provide this as with, for example, in the first case, I would like to know, maybe with 1 or 2 examples, how the cooperation between North and South and West and East differ. So do they deal with the same kind of issues, or they try to solve different issues? Which are the similarities and the differences between these 2 dimensions of the cooperation?
Yeah.
Also, I would like to know maybe 1 or 2 examples of successful projects or agreements achieved by the British Irish Council, the Strand 3, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And finally, you mentioned that in your center you made 5 pre-Brexit, pre-referendum actually reports, trying to identify the possible problems, issues that the Brexit could provoke. And I'm curious about examples of points you actually managed to correctly identify, so problems that actually happened and are happening now, and maybe some examples, if there are any, of problems that could be solved easily in the post-Brexit negotiations. So I'm not sure it was clear. And
yeah.
Sorry, because it's maybe too many questions.
Well, I'll try and I'll answer them all. I'll try. So in terms of differences or similarities between the North-South cooperation and the East-West cooperation, well, there are some obvious differences because just because of geographical realities, the North-South cooperation dimension, let's say, is I wouldn't say it's more active, but there's many more possibilities for North-South cooperation just because of the geographical, nature of the island of Ireland. So that's one of the differences between the North-South and the East-West dimension. But there are similarities. So, for example, where we just to highlight one of the things that we've been doing since the beginning of 2021 is every single 3 months or every quarter, we have been doing a survey of North-South and East-West cooperation. It's part of our work to monitor whether the conditions for North-South and East-West cooperation are being maintained. So we have been engaging with organizations and local authorities or local government on the island of Ireland to just get a sense from them. What are the issues? What are their perceptions of their North-South and East-West cooperation activities? But one of the things that they do is they tell us what areas of cooperation are they involved in terms of areas of interest, sectors on a North-South and an East-West basis. So there we can see what are the areas of North-South and East-West cooperation that are common. Education, that's one of the big areas where it's North-South and East-West. There's a lot of cooperation happening there. Environment, so cooperation on the environment, a lot of work happening there. There's work being undertaken also a lot on both on a North-South and an East-West basis in terms of human rights. So a lot of organizations that would work on human rights and equality issues cooperate on a North-South and an East-West basis. But then there are some complications in terms of what is North-South and what is East-West. So just to give you one example, cross-border mobility, it's very different. So that's mainly on a North-South basis and not necessarily on an East-West basis. So that's where an area that's more active on a North-South than on an East-West basis. So just to give you an idea of the differences. And one of the areas that is also very active on a North-South basis, and again, it's because of the geographical reality, is in the area of health. And just to give you two examples of what that has meant in practical terms. So we have a cross-border cancer institute. So it's a hospital that provides cancer treatment for patients from both sides of the border. It's actually located in Northern Ireland, but it treats patients from the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we also have, for example, a center that deals with cardiac problems with children, and that's based in Dublin, but it accepts patients from all of the island of Ireland, and that's a collaboration between the Departments of Health in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. So health is an area that's very active in a North-South cooperation front. Just briefly, you asked about the British Irish Council and what practical examples of cooperation can I give you. It's more a platform for discussion and for sharing, because the British Irish Council, unlike the North-South Ministerial Council, for example, the British Irish Council isn't really an institution that is set up to come up with resolutions or to come up with any declaration that binds all of the governments together. It's really a platform for sharing of information, for learning, yes, for collaboration, but not necessarily, you know, the ministers go away and all the governments have agreed to sign up to something and to implement something. It's really a discussion forum, whereas the North-South Ministerial Council does have those powers to kind of, the two governments agree to something and then they have to go away and actually implement it. So that's the difference. So the other thing that you asked me was, in terms of what the issues that we identified pre-referendum and what might have become true. Now, I don't want to sound as if we're the best organization in the world, but I must say that most of what we said has come true. All of the potential implications at that stage, the issues that we thought would be problematic are now problematic. So just to highlight a couple, one of the things that we said was that it would create political disruption, and that it's clear, absolutely clear. And I saw somebody had in the Q&A function, they asked a question around why is the DUP, so the Democratic Unionist Party, the biggest party in Northern Ireland that represents the unionist community, why is it refusing to go into government here in Northern Ireland? That's why we, you know, the negotiations on establishing a new government aren't going anywhere. The DUP are refused to form a Northern Ireland government until the protocol is replaced, until we get rid of the protocol. And that's why you probably have been hearing that the UK government is making announcements, is suggesting that they might introduce law in London to get rid of the protocol, either in whole or in part, unilaterally. And some see this as a way of getting to agree to do what the DUP wants, and then the DUP will be able to go into government because it will said, right, the protocol is, we no longer have it, and therefore we'll go into government. But that is, we said that this is going to create political problems, and we now have political problems both within Northern Ireland, relations between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, relations between the UK and the EU. We also highlighted problems for cross-border cooperation. And one of the very practical problems is the ability of Northern Ireland organisations involved in cross-border cooperation in accessing EU funds. If the UK left, then we suggested that the UK might not be able to access certain EU programmes that support cross-border cooperation. Now, I want to stress that one of the things that has been agreed is that the UK, the EU, and the Irish government agreed to a new programme called the Peace Plus programme, which is kind of the replacement of our current Interreg programme and the other programme which is specific to here, which is the Peace programme. There's a new programme that combines Interreg and Peace called Peace Plus, and the UK has agreed to fund that. So is the European Union, and so that will be going ahead. But a lot of the cooperation that we do is outside of Interreg, is outside of Peace. We've been, we're involved in transfrontier kind of regional cross-border programs, and we will no longer have access to that. And that is not just a matter of no longer have the funding. It's also what we're starting to see coming through in the surveys that we've been doing on North-South and East-West cooperation. It means, for example, that some organizations based in the Republic of Ireland are now reporting that they don't have as much contact with organizations from Scotland, England, or Wales, and in some cases organizations in Northern Ireland, because the contact they used to have was through European networks and European funding programs, and because the UK is no longer part of them, that now there's less contact between those organizations, the Republic of Ireland, and those other organizations in Northern Ireland and Great Britain. So that is something that we highlighted, something that's now seems to be becoming a problem. We also highlighted issues around economic development, around trade. What we were trying to highlight, this is pre-Brexit, was trying to make a comparison, because at that point, back in 2016, one of the arguments was, in terms of Brexit, was it would allow the UK to kind of be freer in terms of it being able to reach free trade agreements with whoever it wanted, and no longer being bound to EU policy on trade agreements. So they argued that they weren't able to, for example, to make the trade agreements that they wanted with China, or that they would want to do with India. One of the things we pointed out in 2016 was, if you looked at the major exporters to China, for example, within the top 10 were included Germany, France, Italy, one non-EU member, Switzerland. They were in the top 10. UK wasn't. And we were kind of saying, well, if your argument is that the EU is stopping you from trading with these, well, then what's the problem? Well, Germany doesn't seem to have a problem, and it is an EU member state. Perhaps it's what you're trying to sell to China that they don't exactly want, or the quality of what you're selling, or the price of what you're selling. So we kind of pointed out that there were certain issues around their economic arguments for Brexit. But we also pointed out how Brexit might impact not just on the political kind of landscape, but also in terms of communities and community relations and social cohesion. And we have seen that. You might have seen on the news recently the protests that were held, anti-protocol protests. That is creating huge social division. Well, it's not creating it, it's exacerbating social divisions in Northern Ireland. So there are a whole load of issues that we highlighted pre-referendum that are now happening, that we're now having to deal with. So I hope I answered. I might have forgotten something, but I hope I've answered your questions.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Thank you, Anthony, for your presentation, for your answers. It was just really clear. Just a moment, I just turned down a little bit. Just keeping on the last part you have just been referring just now, it's like this on a daily basis, this day-to-day, you have just referred to, that there is social division. So these main effects, what's your vision in terms of in 5 years times? I know that at this very moment, the social division is there, but how to cope with this in short term and in a long term vision, how to cope with this social division post-Brexit.
Okay, so one of
which is the main part, and it's citizenship. It's the main focus on all the work you have been doing.
Yeah. So what one of the things that in terms of maintaining social cohesion and trying to prevent conflict, and I'm not necessarily saying here violent conflict, I'm just saying disagreement with it between communities. One of the main things, and we have been saying this repeatedly to the UK government and to the European Commission, is the tone that people use at political level affects what happens down at a community level. So you have to be really careful about the language that you use when you are negotiating and when you are speaking in public, that you have to be very careful about the language that you use. And we have been saying that repeatedly to both sides, UK government and the European Commission. There was a period there from about July of last year until very recently where things seem to be, they had toned down what they were saying, and you could see that was helping things on the ground, because there weren't these kind of people coming out and making these very, how can I put it, very powerful announcements that were kind of, you know, anti each other. So the language is really important at a political level. The other thing is, we also repeatedly have been saying to the UK government and the European Commission, we don't want you to keep announcing artificial deadlines, that something must happen by such and such a date, because again, it affects what happens at community level. Because if you say something must happen by such and such a date, then certain people think that when that date happens, all of the problems will have been solved and everything is going to be fine. And then that date arrives and it's not solved. So then people then are angry, but it's the other thing that happens is you start to undermine trust, you start to undermine confidence, then people no longer trust anything that you are saying, and that has consequences at a social level. So one of the main areas where you can help safeguard social cohesion and avoid conflict is by the language that political leaders use, that decision makers use, to avoid incendiary language, negative language, and to stop imposing artificial deadlines. We keep telling the officials involved in the negotiations, what we would really like is to hear nothing from you. We want you to be in a dark room somewhere, quietly trying to resolve these issues. Don't make announcements. Don't say you're going to do anything by such and such a date. Do it quietly. But the other element here is, and this isn't Brexit related, this is the work that most community organizations here are involved in all the time. And it's keeping the dialogue open between communities. It's civic society organizations supporting dialogue, keeping the conversations going, keeping those meetings happening. But that means enormous pressure on community organizations to undertake that work in sometimes very difficult circumstances, but it's absolutely essential that community organizations continue to do that work. So whatever is happening at the political level, at least at the civic society level, we still are trying to maintain the relations. We're still trying to cooperate. Yes, it becomes difficult when the political context is bad, but as long as we keep those conversations going, when the political context improves, then the cooperation can really happen. So there's two things there then, the language used at the political level and the work that happens between community organizations at community level.
So, no? No one? See, you can just, let's ask in Catalan and just go through this. You can just translate it for you.
Well, you can try in Catalan and I'll see if I understand. And if I need,
Okay.
if I need translation, I'll
Just
ask.
try. See? Just try in Catalan. Okay, just one.
You know? I see that in the two different, the North and the Island, they use different currencies. So when a student that travels by the border have to change, like every time he goes by the other side, the currency, or it works both sides?
No, so you're absolutely right. And so that's not a, just to put, that's not a Brexit issue. That was already the case. Yeah, two different currencies always. So obviously in Northern Ireland, we use the sterling, and in the Republic of Ireland, it's the euro. So it's two different currencies. And yes, you do have to, Well, if you're going to, what the advantage is now is that almost nobody uses cash anymore. Everything is by card. So unless you need to use cash, then yes, you would have to change, depending on which way you're going, you'd have to change your sterling to euro, your euro to sterling. Although I have to say that in the border region itself, in many cross-border towns and villages and cities, shops will accept both currencies because they're used to so much that cross-border traffic in terms of people shopping, coming across the border to shop, that they will accept the two currencies. But once you're away from the border region itself, then yes, you need to change your currency.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? No? Okay, thank you very much, Anthony.
So just long. Just ooh. Just to sum up, just your own view on a long-term, your long-term vision of the cooperation between the two borders, Ireland, Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Your own opinion.
My own opinion, and this is from
what you imagine, what's your what you dream for.
Yeah. Okay. So my own opinion, and here I've no problem in saying it is my own opinion or the Centre for Cross-Border Studies opinion, because I know that I'm on safe ground here. And this is from my experience in working with so many organizations involved in cross-border cooperation across the island of Ireland. My opinion is that cross-border cooperation will continue. And the reason it will continue is because organizations know the value of cross-border cooperation. So they will continue. That is not to say that it's going to become more difficult to cooperate because of what's happening in terms of Brexit, but that doesn't mean that they're going to stop. They will continue. However, again, going back to what the surveys that we've been doing, there is an issue that is emerging that is a problem, and that we need to ensure that we look at this problem. I say that cooperation will continue, but what we have started to see is some organizations in the Republic of Ireland starting to, it's not that they're not committed and that they don't value cross-border cooperation, but they're starting to withdraw from that cooperation because they're looking at Northern Ireland and looking at the political context, and they're saying this is something that we're not sure of, and therefore what we're going to do instead is focus on our organization's activities inside the Republic of Ireland, or our cooperation activities with our other European partners in our European network. So some of them are especially smaller organizations. This is a trend that is starting to appear, and we must make sure that it's something that doesn't continue. But I just go back. Many organizations are still committed, and it will continue, that cross-border cooperation on a north-south basis. The east-west basis, that's a bit more complicated, because one of the other things that we have seen in terms of our surveys is that there are organizations that cooperate on an east-west basis, but many are doing that cooperation without any funding. It's one of the main areas of funding for East-West has been Interreg. So the Interreg program that we did have for here was between Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And then there was another Interreg program between Wales and Ireland. And without those, the funding that doesn't seem to be being replaced. And one of the problems is that the UK government has designed some programs to replace EU funding programs. One of them is called the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. But if you just look at the title, UK Shared Prosperity Fund. It's just about the UK. It doesn't envisage cross-border cooperation. So that East-West element, it needs to be supported. For people to continue to cooperate on an East-West basis, then funding must be found. The UK government must find ways of funding that East-West cooperation, because at the moment it isn't really. So my vision is a hopeful one. It's going to be hard, but organizations are committed to continue to collaborate, to cooperate, because they recognize the value of cooperation.
Thank you. I think it's almost time to wrap up this seminar. So thank you very much, Anthony, for your cooperation today and for this optimistic message in the end, despite all the problems we have everywhere. So thank you very much again. And I hope we can invite you in the future to hear from you and with better news. And hopefully you'll have more data on this cooperation in your border, in your region.
Thank you, Jordi. Obrigado. Ciao.